All right, thanks, Aiden. So what we're going to cover today, I think I previewed it a little bit before, but what I'm going to be showing everybody is kind of an end-to-end scenario that I went through for a client trying to build a Teams meetings that was fully interactive, so that there could be a back and forth exchange between meeting presenter and attendee. And what I found along the way is that a lot of it is very intuitive and very straightforward and very, hey, low code, no code, let's do this thing. And some other things are not so obvious. Some things are kind of difficult to manage. Some things are straight up undocumented. And so I wanted to sort of share this experience, some of the capabilities that are there, right? Even if they're not documented well. For other people to take a look at and consider, because I think I've been in this industry, as Aiden mentioned, for a long time. I think a rallying cry we've all heard in this industry for many years is, things like meet your users where they are, and Teams is that kind of perfect example of where your users are, right? And so the more that we can do to move our apps into the their users are more natively going through and give them a cleaner transition, something ideally truly seamless, the better we can do for those users, the more adoption we can get from our apps, and the better value we can deliver for users, customers, whatever your stakeholder group is. Okay, so with that sort of intro aside, what we're going to go through today, I think I'll start with a demonstration of a scenario app. It's not the exact one that I built. I built it just sort of for this demo, and I tried to make it something that was understandable for a lot of people. Hopefully, everybody on this call is going to be familiar with the idea of Agile teams, Agile dev teams, right, and sprint cadences, and the regular ceremony of a sprint retrospective. If you're not familiar with the idea of sprints and sprint retrospectives, the idea is that a dev team plans out their work in some small increment, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks sometimes, and then they go off and they do their work and try to hit exactly the target that was set for them. But they do that in an incremental fashion. They do it sprint after sprint after sprint after sprint. And in order to make sure that at the very least, they're not getting worse sprint after sprint, and hopefully they're getting better sprint after sprint, the Agile team meets at the end of every sprint for a ceremony called a sprint retrospective, when people get together and discuss what happened in the past 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. What did we go through? What are the things that we really thought went well? What are the things that made us all angry? What are the things that, looking ahead to future sprints, we really ought to do a better job of? This is a very common ceremony that Agile teams go through on all kinds of different scales, and there are a lot of apps out there, apps for DevOps, apps for SharePoint, and so on, that give you interface with this. I wanted to give a demonstration through that kind of experience, because it should be relatable to most folks, of how you might do that actually inside a Teams meeting, right? Because people usually are in a Teams meeting, but then they open up DevOps, or they're in their Teams meeting and they open up Asana, or they're in their Teams meeting and they open up whatever that other tool is. And I wanted to bring those two things together. So that's the demonstration we're going to look at today. All right, so with no further ado, let me just go ahead and share out my screen here. All right. So we'll open this up. So as I said before, we're going to begin with all back to the beginning and figure out how we got to that demo, step by step by step. Periodically, we'll come back to the demo and look at these features, right? As we figure out, oh, how do we do this? Then we'll look at the demo again. But really, the demo will sort of like sandwich all of the technical content. So there'll be demo in the beginning and at the end. So here I am in a meeting, and I have opened up. Well, let me close that out here. This is a little test thing. I have already registered an app in this meeting called my Sprint Retrospective. All right, so I can just go ahead and click on that app here in this meeting where I'm the only participant, and it'll open up and load this app. It'll load the definition. And here's my Sprint Retro. I start out with a few items that are already out there in the retro for what went well. Maybe some other people have already put things in for what didn't go well. Maybe some people have put things in for what we could do better. Well, in this case, yeah, we got something out there. And I can add things to it, right? I can add an item here. I can say of things that went well or when didn't go well, right? Again, if I'm the one who I do kind of whatever needs to be done. So let's add an item in here. We'll say this is
Charles, can I jump in for a sec? I think your audio is breaking up a little bit. Would you mind maybe killing your camera?
Yeah, of course. We do that.
All right, thanks. Appreciate it.
Hopefully that's a little bit better. Is it better, Aiden?
Yeah, sounds better now. Thank you.
Okay, great. So we'll add in a new item. We should consider doing something better. We just add this in to our Sprint Retro. Now this is all sitting on the side of our app, right? In the side panel. This is what every user would have access to. Every person who's in this call where we gathered together for a Sprint Retrospective has access to the side app. But it's also important to note that the person who's presenting, right, can actually present out this app and render it full screen as a presentation for all of the attendees. My load times are terrible, apparently. Try presenting again. Guess my bandwidth has gone terrible tonight. There we go. And this is the kind of shared experience that people might see. Now, what's important to note here is that these two things side by side are actually the same app. One is the app as it's designed for a side panel, and the second is an app as it's designed for a screen share, right? In the screen share experience, we can do all the same things. We can update items, we can add new items, right? But we can also take on other capabilities that are not in the side panel, like we can set configuration options, like changing bucket names or setting a minimum of the number of items that we expect from people. We can also tag items as action items, right? So that we can designate items for things that should be there, we should take action on after the meeting. What's also important to note here is that all of the theming in this is actually totally dynamic. So if we open this up here, let's come into my own personal settings. We'll go to our appearance. Instead of dark theme, if we were, say, in the classic theme, the whole app updates automatically. So every user gets their sort of unique experience, right? That's relevant to them. It's aesthetically pleasing. It matches the UI of Teams and where they are, and it doesn't have to feel to that user like they're going somewhere else or they're doing something difficult. If they were, say, they're a user who needs high contrast accessibility on their theme, we could set that up as well, right? All of this theming applies automatically just as soon as they set it in Teams. I prefer dark myself, so I'll go back there. All right. So this is our app. We can add things to it. We can subtract. We can, set action items. It's a basic sort of app plan here that should help people go through the process of a sprint retro. They can evaluate individual items, decide which ones they want to take action on, and then have a consolidated list after the fact. any questions about the app or what I demoed before we actually dive in deep and figure out how all these things were done?
There's no questions in the chat, but a lot of good reactions for the theming. That was really cool.
All right, cool. So let's step all the way back, and we'll look at first. We'll look at creating an app from Teams. That's the first thing, right? Like, how do you create an app that can do some of these things? The Teams theming in particular is very important. And while I have already documented, and I think I blogged about like last year, how you can hack these capabilities into existing Canvas apps, the much easier way to do it is to start from Dataverse for Teams. So let's see how that works. All right, so from a normal Teams interface, if I go into a team, any team, it really doesn't matter which, right? It doesn't matter which. Go into a team channel and then go to Added tab, Power Apps. It'll present you a list of the Power Apps that are already registered in your environment that are published to Teams, which is probably none. In my case, it's a lot more apps than most people. But for most people, that's a zero sum. But you have this button that gets created at the bottom, create an app in Power Apps. This is a good shortcut for doing it, but it's just as easy. So I'm going to show you another option without clicking that. It's just as easy to actually use the Power Apps app in Teams. The Power Apps app here in Teams as a left pinned item, which you can get to from the apps window, where you can create apps directly here as well. Right. So if we go into build, we can pick the team, or for those who know what I'm talking about, subtly the Dataverse for Teams or Dataverse environment that we want to use in where we want to create an app. You can create them on either place. All these little diamonds here, these indicate that these are actually Dataverse instances, and the ones without are Dataverse for Teams instances, right? For those who don't know what I'm talking about. But you can pick any environment that's out here, and you can just go ahead and create a new app. Why are we going through this headache when you already know how to create Canvas apps? You've done it probably many times, and it's much easier than what I'm showing here without going through the hoops in Teams. Well, the main reason is about to surface here in a second. You can see it in gray here on the left. When you create it from inside Teams, a Teams integration object is automatically added to your app. As I mentioned before, it's possible to hack this into existing Canvas apps. And if anybody wants like a demo or a walkthrough on that, I'd be happy to do that as well. But this is definitely the official Microsoft way of doing it. If you want a Teams integration object, create your app from within Teams. What do you want the Teams integration object for? You need the Teams integration object so that you can browse certain capabilities of the team you're nested in. For example, if I wanted to look at, so Teams .theme .name, right? I can see the name of the Teams theme that I'm using, or I can use the Teams is full screen, is side panel, the channel. If this app is nested inside a channel or a meeting, I can get the identity of that meeting or the participants of it and so on, right? If I was to use a flow, I can get a lot of information about where I've been embedded in Teams. And the showy piece you saw before was the theme, right? This is a fairly important object, and that's why kind of this development pattern starts here in Teams. You initiate it here. Now, there's a few things that we can do from here. You may have created your team from a channel directly. You created your app from a channel or something like that, and now you want to scale it. That could mean it's in a Dataverse for Teams app. So I want to show one other very important little tip that I came up with as I was going through this little hack here. I don't even know if I'd call it a hack. But even Dataverse for Teams environments Everybody knows that a Dataverse for Teams environment doesn't show up in the Make portal. Well, that's not exactly true. It just shows up in a different section of the Make portal. And if you want to get to that section, you would open up the Power Apps app here in Teams, go to that Dataverse for Teams instance, and then click See All here. And that'll actually open up the Dataverse for Teams Make interface here inside Teams. So let's say that you made an app already, it's in Dataverse for Teams, but you want to move it to Dataverse, but you don't want to upgrade the entire Dataverse for Teams to Dataverse. You can use this as a trick to get to that app in an actual Make experience and do things like pick the app and export it as a solution. Super handy, really easy way to get at that app definition, pull it out of Dataverse for Teams, including its Teams integration object. Very important stuff here. All right, I've gone through a couple of things. I like to take pauses periodically as I go through these demos, make sure that there are any questions or everybody's following along. Any questions?
No, nothing in chat. Oh, sorry, Lynn.
All right.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm not a dev, full disclosure, but what I thought I understood was that anything you develop in the Teams, you really can't build it as a solution. So the only thing that you're exporting as a solution is the Canvas app, and you would pull in the Canvas app and rebuild everything else and put that in a solution. Is that right?
That is kind of the common perception, Lynn, but it's not true. And that's what I'm trying to show. When you go ahead, like if you say this app depends on 3 tables in your Dataverse for Teams instance and a connection reference and what have you, right? You've built all this stuff in Dataverse for Teams. Now you want to move it out. You absolutely can move those as a solution. And in fact, here in the settings, you can say export all dependencies. So if this app needs a connection reference and 4 tables and 24 fields, it'll export all of them as a solution for you.
But I bet you can't pull it back into a different team.
Into a different D4T?
No, well, like you wanted to replicate this app in multiple teams. You wouldn't be
in multiple teams, yes. In multiple Dataverse for Teams tied teams, that would be trickier. But
okay,
it's not impossible. It's not
well,
impossible.
the goal is to save money, and my understanding is the Dataverse for Teams is free.
Yeah, it is.
And that's what we would want to try to get to. Okay, thank you. I'll shut up.
No, please keep the questions coming. Keep the questions coming. All right, so this is a good way to get the definition out so that you can pull that integration object out if you want it, if you want to work on it in Dataverse full as opposed to D4T. But you can do everything else I'm going to show you coming up in D4T. You don't need to move it out to Dataverse in order to do any of these things. I just find that a lot of large projects that want to do these kind of things want to do it in Dataverse as opposed to D4T. That's all. All right, so let's take a minute now. Remind ourselves of the app and how it looks, right? This was the app. This is the one design, the full screen design to share. And then this is the side panel experience, right? That lets us browse around. And they're very different experiences, but as I said before, they are the same app. So let's take a look at that app. So this is the app that I've actually designed up in Dataverse instance and not a Dataverse for Teams instance. But you can do all this in Dataverse for Teams. I've started with the share experience, but as you can see when I go to a play, if I put it into a mobile platform, you can see how it collapses down. Right? This is mostly done through use of responsive design elements, as well as some just very a little bit more brute force approaches that come down to me knowing that the form factors are so different, and I want to accommodate both of them, right? Like one of them is going to be full screen, and one of them is going to be only about 360 pixels wide, right? And so I have this preset knowledge that allows me to do some things a little bit more brutishly than responsive design would normally require. So let's take a look at some of these differences. I'm using responsive design, for example, to provide multiple columns for my galleries. I'm arranging these galleries all in a series of containers so I don't need to actually compute the XY coordinates, right? And that gives me a lot of advantages, right? As I look at the Teams meeting here, if the Teams meeting isn't quite full screen, it can resize appropriately, right? If it is full screen, then we can see everything a lot more comfortably, but it all adapts, right? For the most part, I don't have to scroll unnecessarily for content when it shrinks a little. But I've also set these two main panels. Let me collapse some of these. Two containers, one designed for the side panel experience and one designed for the share experience, right? So if the share experience only renders if the width is greater than, I think I said it's a 400 or something like that. And the side panel renders if it's smaller than that, right? Nice, easy way of building out your sort of, we'll call it brute force responsive structure, so that you don't need to spend as much time worrying about the number of columns and the arrangements and exactly how reflow is going to work. You can do things a little bit quicker this way because there is a very discrete dark line between the side panel and the full screen experience. If you're not already familiar with containers, they are tremendously important for modern app design, especially any kind of responsive design. It allows you to organize your content using relative values rather than static values for placement. And that is what's incredibly important, right? It makes all the difference between an app that scrolls right for 5 miles and an app that actually shrinks to fit your screen. All right, so the app itself, it should be pretty straightforward. We've got 3 galleries here for the content, what went well, what didn't, what could do better. All of these things are tied to a Dataverse table, which is just a simple table that's got my title, description, whether it's actionable, what bean is it in, right? And then we got a separate gallery over here for action items that could be captured during the evaluation, during the sprint retrospective. Anything that we mark as take action gets added to our action items. Right? Nice, simple, straightforward app. The important stuff for designing it, right, beyond the responsive elements in the UI and so on, right, is the theming, right? That's, I think, a lot of people are interested to see more about. Right? We have this Teams integration object. How are we actually going to use this Teams integration object to style that app? Well, we're going to do it using formulas and formulas here in the app definition. So first of all, I define my own theme object in formulas. I always use, so you could use OnStart for this, by the way. You don't need to use it in formulas, but formulas are just a little bit more resource efficient. They don't slow down the load as much. And formulas let you more gracefully build complex objects, right? This is, anybody who's a developer will kind of look at this theme object and kind of understand it right away, right? So in my theme object, I have a light theme, a dark theme, and a contrast theme, and I can set specific properties to the background, to panel values, to text, to icons, to a primary button, to an accent, right? And I can set these for all the different themes. Not all of them need to have values. Maybe there isn't a primary accent to a light theme, but there is a primary accent to a contrast theme, for example. And this allows me to define a whole bunch of these values up front, and then as I'm building elements out, for example, this container right here, the header container, I can actually set its color. Instead of setting an RGB value, I can set its color to current theme.panels, right? So whatever the theme is, use the panels value in order to build this out, right? I can set the background on this color to current theme.background. I can set the text font color to current theme.text, and so on and so on and so on, right? So I don't need to write 75,000 times RGB 255, 255, 255, 1. I can just say current theme text, and it will respond to the appropriate theme. And I don't need to write a whole ton of conditional statements. All of that has a formula and is evaluated at runtime. But at runtime being any time the formula definition may have updated. All right, any questions about that theming for the moment? All right, so where we get the value then for the theme is then the next line in the formulas, where I'm going to set that current theme. You saw the current theme object before, right? What I'm saying is current theme is a conditional expression. If the team's theme, and this is coming from that integration object, right? The team's integration object on the left. If the team's theme name is dark, then use theme dark. If the team's theme name is contrast, use contrast. If otherwise, use theme light. Now, I want to point out here that this is not how everybody else should be doing this particular line. I have a bug in my tenant, in my Microsoft tenant, and I've had an open ticket with Microsoft since September. So you all should not have to write it the way that I did. You should have a better way. It's just, for me, my tenant has a bug. The way that everybody else in this call should be writing this same line would be something like current theme equals if teams dot theme dot name equals teams theme dot dark, right? And then whatever else, right? In my tenant, for whatever reason, there is no teams theme object. But it exists in every other tenant I've ever seen in my life. It's documented. It should exist in your tenants. I just have a bug in my tenant, and Microsoft hasn't been able to figure out why. So when you go, if you guys go to do this sort of thing, don't try and evaluate against a static string. This is a bad idea. I'm only doing it because I have a bug. Instead, use this object, teams theme, right here, teams theme, and teams theme will have a dark, it'll have default, it'll have contrast, and you don't need to write static strings. All right, any questions about how I built the app or the responsive elements or the theming? Okay, so let's take a look at exporting the team, or exporting the app for Teams, right? So let's come over here. We'll just leave the app definition here. So all the Microsoft documentation about exporting an app to Teams will tell you the same thing, that it is very easy. It's a 2-click process, and you're done. And that is true with a few asterisks on it. For any one of these apps, if you want to export it to Teams, it is true that you can go to Share and hit Add to Teams, and then just click Add to Teams, and it will push to Teams. However, what it pushes to Teams is a manifest that is slightly old and only contains one capability, which is the ability to pin something to the left navigation in Teams. To come back over, not to the meeting, but to my actual Teams instance, that's this kind of thing. To pin it like this kind of app. Okay, so you can push an app like this with that one click. Or back over here at the export, if you instead hit download app, then you can download a manifest, you can import to Teams, and it will do two things. It will do that left navigation, or you can embed it inside a channel as a tab. But we're trying to do something even more complicated. We're trying to actually deploy this app into a Teams meeting, and neither one of these patterns will support that. They simply won't, and we're going to go into why in just a moment. But what you do in order to make it work is you download the app. So you can download a manifest definition. And the manifest is what we're going to edit manually in order to make it work in a Teams meeting. So we download this manifest. Inside the manifest, we will see, excuse me. You'll see 3 different files. Right, you'll see the a color file, which is just the icon it's going to use. So if you don't like the icon that's set by default, you can put your own in here. An outline, same thing, it's just another icon file. And then the manifest, which is a JSON definition file that'll actually tell Teams what is it here to do. If any of you are familiar with building M365 applications, this is very similar to how you deploy M365 apps. You don't actually deploy an app. You host a website somewhere and you deploy a manifest that points to that website. So everything you're seeing in that app in the Teams meeting, it's actually just an iframe. It's pointing at a web location. It's just an iframe that comes with, some fancy additional capabilities, permissions, other definitions. Let's take a look at some of those right now. So on the left side is the manifest as it exports immediately from Teams. Let's take a look at that first before we look at the right. The manifest includes a schema definition, a manifest version. It includes some permissions that this will need on the device where it might be embedded. It includes information about the person who developed this app, a name, short name and full name, etc. Description information, other things that Teams can use to render this application in a way that makes sense to people. But the important thing is that there is a content URL and a website URL. And these are the things that are actually getting rendered. Teams isn't actually getting some kind of clone of your Canvas app. It's getting a URL to show your Canvas app. So after you deploy it to Teams and you update your Canvas app, Teams will always stay in sync. So even as you make changes to your app definition in Canvas apps, you do not need to redeploy this app to Teams. It will always stay in sync. Now, I mentioned on the right side is a slightly different definition. This is the manifest as we have to edit it in order to actually get things to work in a Teams meeting. The first and most important thing that has to be edited is the schema and manifest version. Power Apps is still using a very old manifest version for Teams. And I don't know why. The product group has a lot of things that they're doing, right? They've got a lot of things they're prioritizing, and this isn't the highest adoption area. So they haven't updated their manifest in a long time. But the latest manifest is actually 1.16 and not 1.8. And if you aren't using the latest manifest, then you can't do some of the things I'm going to do later on. So you have to update the schema location to point to version 1.16, and you have to update the manifest version to point to 1.16. Other items that are in here, like the ID, the package name, device permissions, these things can basically stay the same way. While you've got it open here in editing, you can do things like you can change the developer's name to whoever you want it to be, right? You can change a website, you can change all these other display informations. You can change the short definition or the full description or other values that are in here. You can kind of edit all this XML as you see fit. The main next section that needs to be edited, right? Not like a lot of those were optional. The schema and manifest are required to edit. The next thing that's required to edit is the configurable tabs. If you want to build an app for Teams, you must edit this. Static tabs are for tabs in a team or tabs in a channel. Configurable tabs are for more dynamic tabs that exist on ephemeral content like chats, calls, and Teams. Okay, so a configurable tab requires certain information, and in our case, the out-of-the-box exported one doesn't really do anything. You can put it into the meeting's details, You can put it in the meeting chat. You can put it into a private chat. You can put it into a channel tab, but you can't, importantly, put it into the meeting stage. So that share element that I did, where I click the share button and I'm pushing an app definition out to all the attendees, that cannot happen with the out-of-the-box definition. You have to update and add meeting stage to the definition in order to do that. And meeting stage won't work if you're using the 1.8 manifest. You have to use the 1.16 manifest to do it. Okay. So we add meeting stage to this definition. And then we add, finally, we add an authorization section. And I'm just going to take 1 second and pause here because my headset is dying and I want to get on a different audio device. Give me just 1 second here, folks. Can everybody hear me?
Yep, sound good.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry about that. Headset was dying. All right, so the last section in the XML that needs to be updated is the authorization section, which is not present in the 1.8 manifest. Again, you have to get to the latest manifest to do it. Authorization allows you to request the permission to write to that meeting stage. So we've said that the app can present content in the meeting stage, but it also needs to request from admins permission to do so, a delegated permission, so that it can present on behalf of the person that clicked that button. Okay, so these are all the updates need to happen to the manifest XML before you can then import it as a Teams app. Once you have updated all those and you've zipped it back up, you simply go into Teams, you go into your apps, you go into manage your apps, and you can upload an app. If you are the global admin, as I happen to be, you can push it straight into the app catalog. Otherwise, you can just submit it to an admin and the admins can approve. When an admin goes to approve, they have the Teams management website interface where they can go in and approve these things. Okay. Once the app has been uploaded and approved, if approval is necessary, then it can be added to a team. Or more importantly, to a meeting, rather, sorry. You would open up the meeting definition and add that app as a tab. So here's my Sprint Retrospective tab. All I had to do was just click on the add a tab for the meeting definition and pick Sprint Retrospective here. By adding it as a tab in the meeting, it became possible for me to do this. It renders here in the meeting as a button. I click it and it does everything you saw. Right, so I went pretty fast through a lot of that content. I'm hoping that there's some questions. I'm happy to go back and show again any sections that people want to see again, anything that the folks want to take a look at.